Shock GDP figures that saw an economy that's shrinking and the ever-present problem of unemployment. Poverty levels in South Africa again continue to come into sharp focus. The question, though, is how is poverty even measured in South Africa? How many poor people are there? And can it actually even be measured in different ways, I guess? Well, these are frequently asked questions about poverty in South Africa that AfricaCheck set about to try and find answers for. Researcher Liesl Pretorius is from AfricaCheck, and she joins me now to tell us what they found out. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So one figure suggests 30.4 million people in South Africa live in poverty. And it's a big number, but how does one even go about measuring who's poor and who isn't? Because I guess anyone will say, I'm poor, but there must be measures.
So there are official poverty lines that Stats SA publishes every year. So they published official poverty lines in 2018. So Stats SA calculates these and then they attach a value to it. And the value changes based on living conditions in the country. So it's not a static. So for example, there are 3 poverty lines. There's an extreme poverty line based on food consumption. And then there are 2 poverty lines where you have some elements of non-food items included. So based on the upper bound poverty line, which is the highest of the 3, and based on 2015 values, 56% of the South African population at that stage were considered to be poor.
All right. So tell us about people who fit into that category. What would we see in terms of recognizing them as poor?
So Stats SA, for example, for the food poverty line, Stats SA came up with a basket, and then they will look at what does this basket cost in different times, so from year to year. There's, for example, eggs and milk and bread in that basket. For the other poverty lines, they looked at non-food items that people spend on, and they sort of have a minimum and a maximum value, and that's how they calculated it. And these non-food items could be things like clothing, transport, shelter. Right.
So I see from your website, food poverty line 547 Rand per person per month. So, and that's the food poverty line. So what we're saying is that if you're spending less than that, then you are below the food poverty line in South Africa.
Yes, and the food poverty line is based on the number of calories that you need per day to survive. So that is the bare minimum.
My goodness. So, do we know then how many people are? Is it 30.4 million people?
So the 56%, that is roughly that number. It comes to that number, but you will always have to ask, is it the latest available number? That's what we do when we do a fact check. This was a fact sheet. It does contain the latest numbers. And when we do a fact check, we'll go back to the source, ask them where they got it, and then we'll see, is it the latest available number?
So that's Stats SA, the way that they've put it together. Are there other ways of measuring it? I suppose, you know, there could be a number of ways of trying to determine what poverty is.
Indeed. So there was an effort by a group of organizations, and they came up with a decent standard of living. So they're saying, let's not look at calories. That's the bare minimum. Let's look at what you need to survive, not just to survive, but to have a decent standard of living. And they came up with 21 items that you need, including, like, do you have access to a fridge? Do you have access to the grid, electricity, etc., warm clothes? And they say the value of that is about 7,000 Rand. So think of the upper bound poverty line is 1,183. This is like more like 7,000 Rand. Yes. So that's the difference.
So that's what we would call the minimum decent way of life.
Yeah, that's what they came up with.
Across.
Yes.
All right. I suppose it's challenging then to figure out who is earning those amounts, because unless you fill in a tax return or something, how do we know who's below 547 Rand a month?
So Stats SA has an income and expenditure survey, so they do survey people, but what I know from other research that I've done is that, of course, when people declare what they earn, what they spend on, there will be some errors, either because people don't know, or because, for example, if you ask them about savings, they'll say, this will be the maturity value of that saving, not the value now. So there's all kinds of complexities around that.
All right. So what's been the trend over the years in terms of the levels of poverty in South Africa? Is it that it's been rising, or has it been going up and down? What have you seen?
according to Status A's measure, it has gone down from 2006 to 2009, again from 9 to 11,
Right.
and then from 11 to 15 it went a little bit up again.
All right. So it was going down. That was the trend, and it started to pick up again.
Yes. And Status A tells us that they think it's because of factors like the cost of energy and food, unemployment, and economic growth,
Wow.
which they say is low and slow.
Okay, so it's not looking great at all on the economic front. So those stats probably likely to rise. Liesl, thanks so much indeed for coming through and giving us this all-important information. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay.